Bartholomew Town.
Welcome into Bartholomew Town. Remember, you can find us wherever you get podcasts and Saturdays on WPRO Radio. I'm Bill Bartholomew. Today, an important conversation, no doubt about it. This is obviously something that's global, but we're focusing today on someone who's in our general region working on the broad conversation around harsh prison sentences, specifically life without parole. Doctor, I guess the best thing to do is if you want to introduce yourself and tell us about the work that you're doing with, this again, it's a broad conversation, but specifically working with DROP LWOP New England, which is where you're the executive director.
I am. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Brashani Reece, and I'm the executive director of DROP LWOP New England. As you mentioned, Life Without Parole is the acronym there. And so the work that we do is focused on looking for pathways for persons who are serving life without parole specifically, but really any type of extreme prison sentence in which a person is likely to die behind bars, looking for pathways to provide more rehabilitation and then allow those people to come home. I would note that my work is very personal. Something that I share very publicly is that I myself am a survivor of attempted murder. And that was long before I came to this work. And I started pursuing this work as a result, pretty much a direct result of that specific event in my life.
How can you give us a little bit more detail on that? Because that's really interesting, and obviously the personalization of it is a powerful anecdote or a powerful way to introduce this conversation. But anything you can share about that?
Sure. So I was a very young woman when this situation happened, and I almost lost my life. And instinctually, I think I just understood that going through the court process was not what I needed. The thing that I wanted from the situation was I wanted accountability. First and foremost, the person who had almost taken my life to be held accountable. And I just knew that putting him in a cage was not really accountability. That's not really accountability. And then the second thing I wanted him to get help. Because if he had almost taken my life, I had a legit fear that even though I was never going to be with him again as a romantic partner, what would happen to the women that he was with in the future? And I didn't want anybody to die. And so I thought that his rehabilitation needed to be a key component of why he was going to prison. And I just had a feeling that that wasn't going to be the case.
Wow.
And it turned out that what I was looking for was something more like a restorative justice process, which brings healing through dialogue with the person that has committed the harm.
Wow. What was it initially that sort of made you have this opinion that what was necessary for you as a victim might differ from that which from a penal system or from a correction standpoint would be conventional?
I think it was that I recognized the violence happened in an interpersonal context. He was somebody that I knew and that I was with. And when you look at violence and where it happens, it's almost always with somebody that you know, a family member, an acquaintance, somebody you go to school with, in the case of gang violence, somebody you know from the streets, that type of stuff. And so there's just a lot of emotion there. And so I think that there's a lot of healing that can be had if that person can then get the help that they need, because then we can heal, maybe never be in relationship ever again. That's totally fine. But we can heal enough to understand that we're all a part of this community. And, you don't want to continue hurting people going forward. So breaking the cycle of violence is super important.
No doubt about it. A powerful stance to take. And how did that lead you into the work that you do today? And what does that work look like from an advocacy standpoint on the ground in real time?
I found restorative justice a few years after I had gone through the court system, which had just re-traumatized me. I was carrying a pretty intense PTSD diagnosis, and a friend had recommended a restorative justice program that had been developed in California. So my desire to help incarcerated people came directly from that experience. I trained as a restorative justice facilitator in San Quentin prison, and sitting in that space with men who had committed murder, sexual assault, really intense levels of violence, I really I don't know how else to describe it other than it was a spiritual experience. Mm-hmm. Those men were very accountable, extremely remorseful. They were rehabilitated. They had changed. And what I saw in that space just made me feel like I want to do this. I want to find other people who are in prison, who have changed their lives, who can be spokespeople for rehabilitation and the benefits of restorative justice.
You mentioned accountability, which is such a key word. And when we think about corrections in whatever context, really, like ancient, contemporary, there's always that question of accountability versus regret because the person ended up in the situation that they're in versus actual accountability. So you led with accountability. You really, from your work on the ground, you think that our current system at least affords the opportunity for some level of, if not full, accountability by many offenders?
I have witnessed the transformation of people inside that includes real accountability, but I will tell you it's not the cage that makes a person accountable. In my experience, often men who have committed violence thought that was the right thing to do. They were in moments and contexts in which violence was actually encouraged. And so then when they come to prison, what I have seen is a lot of young men are mentored by the older men who have been in there for a really long time. And we know from the science, and we could talk a little bit about life without parole and why we should get rid of life without parole. But one of the major parts of that is that people age out of crime. So by the time somebody is in their 40s or 50s, they have naturally stopped engaging in any sort of criminal activity, but especially violence. They say that violence is a young man's game. And the average length of a career criminal is 10 years, which is about as long as my Comic-Con side hustle. So when you think about somebody aging out of crime naturally, but they're still sitting in prison, a lot of times those men are then looking for meaning, and they find that meaning through mentoring younger men. And in those spaces, I have seen just that kind of work helps change people and helps bring people around to accountability. Accountability is not a thing you can force. And so putting someone in a cage, they could go their entire lives without ever being accountable for the crime that they committed.
That obviously is the whole point of the judicial. I mean, look, the judicial system on the whole, there has to be some level of protection of the public. That's obviously first and foremost in theory. And obviously it's also become an industrial complex where there's a huge for-profit element to lock in people up and so on and so forth. And there's, of course, also at the end of the day, hopefully a way to make people feel that depth of accountability through whatever process and reform. At the end of the day, that should be at the front of the conversation. It's not often, though. Where do you, I know you're New England based, but where have you done a lot of this work?
Well, so we operate in all 6 New England states. And if I could just quickly address a myth that really needs to be busted here, which is that long prison sentences don't scare criminals. We know that throwing the book at people, the severity of the sentence does not stop crime. But we know that what does stop crime is the certainty that they'll be apprehended. So if we think about crime prevention, what we actually need to do is better fund our police work, better fund our detective investigations, so that people feel more of a sense of certainty that they would be caught if they committed a crime, as opposed to just making sentences longer and longer, because a life without parole sentence doesn't make us any safer than a life with parole sentence where a person will be evaluated whether or not they can come home. In either of those cases, the crime has already been committed. We didn't actually prevent any murders. And my goal is to prevent murder from happening and violence from happening.
Mm-hmm. Such an important way to position this conversation. What's the work look like on the ground for you? And let's keep this in the context of Rhode Island. Have you done any work with the Adult Correctionals Institute here? And what's your relationship like with the other corrections departments around New England? Do they see you as somebody who is working in the same direction or somebody who's trying to undo sort of their practices?
I love the focus on Rhode Island because we're super excited to be coming back again this year, 2026, with another piece of legislation. We began working there about 4 years ago with a repeal of life without parole. And in the great state of Rhode Island, that would only impact 31 people currently as of right now, if we were to allow a parole hearing to happen for those individuals. So we have actually shifted gears to what we call a look back policy. And this is a type of policy we work on in the other New England states as well. It's broader than life without parole from a 30,000-foot view. It is simply allowing a person to petition a judge to ask for a review of their sentence after a very lengthy period of time in prison. It's really focused on rehabilitation. It's really focused on disciplinary violations, because it's an opportunity for that person to say to a judge, here are all of the ways in which I have invested in myself while I've been in prison for the last 20 years, for instance. And also, by the way, I have remained violence free for those 20 years, or things like that. And I'm very excited to say that we have a really great relationship with the Rhode Island Department of Corrections. We've been in conversation with them about this look back policy, and we're hoping to work hand in hand with them in designing what those specific requirements would be. But our focus beyond the Department of Corrections is to invite all of the partners to the table and say, what makes the most sense from a public safety perspective, from a humane perspective, from an effective DOC policy perspective. So that's what we're doing in Rhode Island, and we're super pumped about it.
Do you think there's a chance that this conversation becomes sort of or in lockstep with a lot of the abolition of capital punishment conversation that defines certain states? You take a look at Rhode Island. I think the most recent example was there was a horrible crime committed in Woonsocket. A guy killed somebody who was depositing, safe deposit bag of cash. And then Governor Lincoln Chafee refused to hand that person over to the federal government. It was an interstate crime because of opposition to the death penalty. So you have governors taking stands, sort of opposing the federal government on something like this. Do you feel like this conversation is going to get to that same level of
Bartholomew Town?
You've been hearing me talk a lot about Navigant Credit Union, and for good reason. As Rhode Island's first ever member-owned credit union, Navigant Credit Union has been a staple in the local business community for more than 108 years. Today, Navigant is a $3.4 billion institution serving more than 136,000 members across 25 physical branch locations. But since its founding in 1915, the mission has never changed. Navigant Credit Union's team of financial professionals have remained committed to improving the financial well-being of the families, businesses, and communities they serve across Rhode Island. Learn more at navigantcu.org. Half Street Group brings a new generation's perspective to leadership communications, strategic public relations, and digital marketing. Half Street helps organizations and leaders take control of their own stories and manage their reputations. They get results for their clients by focusing on audience, message, and culture, and by leveraging their decade-long relationship with media and opinion leaders in the Ocean State and throughout New England. Join me and Half Street Group founder and president Mike Rea for a conversation every month about news of the day, the hottest media analysis, and a look behind the scenes at how impactful leaders drive conversations. You can learn more at halfstreetgroup.com. Bartholomew Town is brought to you in part by Newport Film. Check out newportfilm.com for all the latest screening details. Are you ready to take the next step in your career? At URI Online, we offer business and leadership-focused programs designed to fit your life. Whether your goal is to advance your career in fields like public administration, supply chain management, or training and development, our online programs provide the flexibility you need with the high-quality education you deserve. Learn from experienced faculty and collaborate with a network of professionals, all from the comfort of your home or wherever life takes you. Visit uri.edu/online to explore programs and start building your future today. URI Online. Learn anywhere with us. This is going to be very ideological, very geographical, and ultimately spark a lot of discussion the way that today when we see capital punishment in Alabama or something like that, it frankly is horrifying to a lot of the country. Is this on that track?
I absolutely think it is, because if we look at what life without parole actually is, it's a slow motion death penalty. You are condemning somebody to die very slowly in a cage. And when we cut off all possibility of release, we are saying to that person, we think you're garbage and incapable of ever changing. Life without parole is the walking death penalty. And we are also alone in our use of the life without parole sentence around the world globally. Life without parole has actually been deemed as cruel and unusual punishment by some of our closest allies, including Canada, Germany, some of those other Western countries. Because when we deny the most basic human thing, which is hope, I mean, we are being cruel at the end of the day. I'll also add that as the death penalty started to go down, life without parole went up, but I'm talking like 1,000-fold. So that number of people would have never been sentenced to be executed. It's almost as if once we removed execution, we all felt way more comfortable with the idea of just, letting somebody die a slow death. When you talk to people who are serving life without parole, many of them actually wish that they were going to be executed instead, because then they would have a quote unquote out date. And that's more, that's for them psychologically, mentally, emotionally, that's a better solution.
When we look around the globe, there are certainly examples where there are far, far harsher prisons. I think of South America, certainly Brazil, no doubt there. I've had a chance to even have conversations with people on the ground who work in Brazilian prisons. It's a disaster, no question about it. Maybe not across the board, but it's by and large. And then we also look to some Scandinavian countries where we see a completely different model of corrections, where it mimics what some people would maybe imagine the softest federal prison for the lowest level offenders to be. Maybe not even that harsh. In some cases, prisoners able to leave for work or even lunch at times. What does the U.S. have to do to get more into the Scandinavian, even in some cases, I don't know how to frame this, but a more humane version of incarceration while balancing the need for some sort of deterrent or negative outcome for the commitment of crimes? How do we balance that and get our country sort of modernized here?
It's the lamest answer ever, which is follow the research.
Mm-hmm. It's like, not the lamest answer. That's the best answer.
Yeah, it's like we know so much about what works. I mean, we have about 50 to 60 years of really solid research around what prevents crime. And then when people are incarcerated, what helps with rehabilitation. I mean, we have had research up the wazoo. Academics have been very busy around prison and incarceration. We know so much about what's effective, but I have to tell you that our emotions really get in the way in this situation. So if somebody heard that somebody was sentenced to, 20 years for a homicide, somehow, somewhere in our culture, that 20 years became like 2 days. And there's just this real feeling of injustice. And if you have never been put in a cage yourself, if you've never been, had your freedom taken away, you might think that 20 years is a cakewalk. And I hear a lot of that. Why does that person get to come home one day? They took a life, So our culture, I think we would do a lot better if we were curious about what really works. I talk to correctional officers all the time, and I talk to them about specific individuals, and they say to me, I know which guy should be able to come home. Like, I see him every day. I'm intimately familiar with his programming activities, what he's up to, who comes and visits him, all of that sort of stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that would be a valuable person to then be a part of the process of maybe this person should be able to come home. Not saying that they would be the sole voice in the room at all, But my point is that's specific to life without parolers. And I will have people inside the prison say to me, this guy should come home. This guy should really come home.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. So to that end, what would your message be to corrections officials, lawmakers, law enforcement, anybody out there that's hearing this and saying, hey, geez, we got good guys, we got bad guys, and we need to lock the bad guys up? Because I still hear people talk that way in law enforcement and other communities around here. I'm not saying they're ill-intended in that conversation, but we literally hear that language sometimes where, there's this notion that there are good guys and there are bad guys. It seems like Saturday morning cartoons or 1992 professional wrestling, yet that's a worldview held by a lot of people. How do you break it?
First off, I'm always curious when people feel that way, what's coming up for them. And then my instinct is always to partner, because I think we have really great law enforcement officials who have really good intentions. I think we have strong administrators and correctional officers in the prisons who have good intentions. And so then I say to myself, I bet you know of somebody who deserves a second chance. Is there a way that we can channel that image of that person and maybe be a little more curious about the other people that you don't know who are in the system, who might actually be your best asset if they were to come home and then help you with violence interruption in the community, help you talk to gangs and reduce, guns and drugs and all these other things, because that's happening other places in the world. So let's do it together. Let's make the community safer together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It makes so much sense. Do you think, based on your work, that we're heading towards a moment where there's going to be an opportunity for more of a joint partnership in law enforcement, corrections, lawmakers, community, so on and so forth? We're going to get to a day where, hey, you know what? There's a new outlook on criminal justice in our lifetimes. Or do you think the headwinds are so strong that it's going to require advocacy that goes well beyond our lifetimes to make this change? What's your gut on that?
I'm an optimist. I think we're going to need more than just my lifetime. But what I will say is this: we have more people who are who have served life without parole sentences back in the community than ever before. And I know that the presence of those individuals, that's changing the conversation. Quick story, one of the guys that I know who came home from Massachusetts and then moved to Maine, and he got a job at UPS. And after being there for about a year, he heard a conversation that was happening, water cooler talk. It led to him revealing to his coworkers that he did 30 years for murder as a juvenile life without paroler. And that entire group of people, the look on their faces, right? And they just said to him, yeah, but you're a good guy, which goes back to your good guy, bad guy.
Yeah.
And to which he was able to say, I left a lot of good guys behind. So please help me bring them home too.
Yeah. So powerful. How can people get involved if they're interested after hearing this today?
They can visit us. We have our website is www.droplwop, LWOP, newengland.org. And I'm also really easy to find if you Google my name. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, all of that jazz. We would love for people in Rhode Island to get involved with what we're doing this coming year.
Can you give us your handle on Instagram just so people know if there's a doctor or anything like that?
It's at Brashani Reece.
Okay. Dr. Reece, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for your important work. And you know what? I think New England may be obviously it's a great frontier for these conversations, but look forward to taking this to some of the questions that you posed today, or the ideas or ideals that you bring to the table, and seeing what some of the reaction is from some leaders around here as we get into 2026. Is this going to be something that defines a governor's race? Probably not, but it's worth knowing where the candidates stand. That's for sure. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Bartholomew Town is brought to you by Navigant Credit Union, Half Street Group, the University of Rhode Island Online, and Newport Film.